Okay, now we can do part B of our lesson. And let's see what I want to do now. Day 5. Speaking of living things, on day 5, God used his creative power to populate the earth with all kinds of living things. He gave to the sea a vast array of living creatures. And you know what? We're still discovering some. There are still creatures in the depths of the sea that we have never met. Hardly a year goes by where some discovery of a new living creature is announced, caught in the nets of fishermen, or observed by deep diving submarines, searching, probing miles beneath the surface of the water. God gave us the skies filled with an array of creatures, not just birds, but insects, bats, which are rodents with wings, and other living things that have the power of flight. God gave the earth an enormous array of living things. Many of them have gone extinct. Some are on the verge of going extinct. But we're still discovering species on planet Earth that we have never seen before. But you know what? God is not one of these creatures. And in mythology, they worship creatures. Not only did they worship creatures, but they imagined creatures that were a blend of, like beasts of the field have a man's head, or a body of a man with the head of a beast. They had all kinds of crazy ideas that were drawn from what they saw in nature. But God is not a beast of the field. God is not a combination of any of these things, as some ancient religions would have you believe. God is, as Jesus told us, and we'll read in just a moment, a spirit and not a living animal. Instead of their perception of what God is the genius who conceived all of these things that exist and are discovered by mankind. Everything that it speaks of on day 5 springs from the mind of God. He spoke them into existence. Now let's go down to verse 26 through 27. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. Now, in your personal study, this text goes all the way down to verse 31, but we hardly have time enough in our lesson today to cover the printed text, so I'm trying to stick to that. Modern man, our peers, resists the truth and still searches for answers to the origin of mankind. Most popular among all the beliefs in man's explanations is the belief that somehow humans are evolved apes. They find similarities of the physical design of creatures, and they assume that one caused the existence of the other. So they see similarities in apes, and they assume that man was caused by mutation or a change that evolved over time in stages and became an ape, that is upright and an ape that can speak. They see monkeys or apes using tools, and they say, look, there's proof that this, in a couple million years, would be a man. But even though they try to construct a chain of evolution, evolution as understood only exists in the micro form, not the macro. In the micro scheme, you can see things evolve. For instance, birds will change their characteristics over several generations if they're moved from one environment to another. They'll adapt, and their beaks will change, or their coloration will change as they adapt to the new environment. But that's a micro-evolution, not an evolution from one species to another. And an evolution from one species to another species has never been observed by man. Not only has it never been observed, even under the most strenuous and expensive efforts, they've never been able to cause that evolutionary step to take place. There is no physical evidence of a link between two species. So, the Bible teaches us that these distinctly different species were the product of creation and not evolution. And it tells us that man was not an evolved ape, but God spoke man into existence on the sixth day. Now, you also notice here that when God created man, he gave him a much higher position in the cosmos than anything that he created. Throughout the Bible, God reveals himself to man in forms that man understands. Now begin with the fact that he says that he made man in his own image. God doesn't have a physical form. Look at John chapter 4, verse 24. The words of Jesus. He is explicit in John 4:24. He says, God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship him in spirit and in truth. So, what of these physical manifestations? Well, there's all kinds. Of course, the hand writing on the wall, the finger of God writing on stone. Those are manifestations of God that are in the form of attributes that man has. Then there's the burning bush that Moses observed. God is not a burning bush, nor does he have a physical body like man's that sends a hand to be seen by man. No, Jesus tells us that God is a spirit. Each of these manifestations are events that are designed to communicate to us using things we understand, because God is far beyond our comprehension in his spirit form. So he used the burning bush to impress on Moses the sacredness of the communication that was taking place, its importance, the fact that it was divine in nature and origin. All of that was impressed upon Moses, and it caused him to be in terror. He took off his shoes. He acknowledged he was in the presence of God. His heart was filled with fear, and he trembled at what was happening to him, because the burning bush was a manifestation of God that he could comprehend. And the same with the manifestation of the hand and all the other anthropomorphisms that occur throughout the Bible. When John the Baptist baptized Jesus in the river? He saw the Holy Spirit descend on Jesus. Is God a dove? He saw a dove. No, God is not a dove. But John the Baptist understood that this was God the Spirit coming down and filling the one whom he was baptizing. It was an anthropomorphism. God communicating to man in a form that man could get his hands around, that he could grasp it and get the truth of it. In making man, God has chosen to communicate his nature, not his form. When he says, I have made man in my image, he is talking about the fact that he has given man this higher station above all the other things in the cosmos. Modern man has flipped it on its head. They're more worried about a salamander or a small minnow or a frog that they fear is going extinct than the people who are affected by the craziness that they impose on them to protect the stupid salamander or the minnow whose loss is not going to change the world, but to allow people's lives to be lost or ruined or their wealth taken from them to preserve that insignificant creature. Now, I don't want to trash the environment. That is not what I'm saying. And I'm not encouraging that. We're the stewards of that environment. God gave us that task when he gave us this superior position. Mankind is above the earth, just as God is above us. The psalmist explains the place of man, the place that he holds in creation, in Psalms chapter 8, in verse 5. The psalmist says, you made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. Now, this is a messianic prophecy, but it's not talking about the whole Logos in heaven. It's talking about the whole Logos on the earth, born to Mary, wrapped in swaddling clothes, but worshipped by angels and the shepherds from the field, who later became a 12-year-old teacher in the tabernacle in Jerusalem, and then as an adult drove the heretics, the money changers, the greedy grubbers from the court of the temple, who later came back bound by the guards of the temple and the priest to be placed in a kangaroo court, and then was beaten, vilified, spat upon, cursed by man whom he created. But all that was done while he was in the form of a man. As the psalmist said, you made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. He was a man. God, the whole Logos, took the form of a man to go to the cross. Higher than any beast in the field, ultimately higher than the angels, but for a time, merely a man. Now, in creating man, God also created woman, didn't he? And he didn't create woman to be an inferior. He took the part of a man, his ribs, and he fashioned woman beginning with that part, around that part, because she was to be his equal, not his subordinate, his companion. God designed this relationship with his divine order of things for the purpose of perpetuating the species. Marriage, it's not an accident. Marriage is God's design. a mutual relationship, not one of servitude or superiority of one over another. Instead, one where each has a unique role, both having equal importance in God's design, in the plan of things. Now, mankind is in a state of rebellion. Fallen man, sinful man, is in a state of rebellion. And as a consequence, mankind has distorted God's design. He's twisted it. He's corrupted it. He's broken it in many ways. Marriage, as God made it, has been remade by fallen man. It now includes many forms that were never intended by God. Modern society now includes and makes commonplace cohabitation. Marriages fail in divorce. Multiple partners, in some instances, polygamy. Call it a marriage. Men call it a marriage. I didn't say God does. Men call it a marriage. Even relationships between the same sex. Men have redefined those relationships by redefining marriage, corrupting the definition of marriage. God did not intend for marriage to be an unending relationship. Did not intend for marriage to be a relationship that comes to an end. He intended for it to be a relationship that is unending between one man and one woman. Jesus explained to his disciples that it was because of the hardness of hearts that Moses gave direction and law for divorce. That was not God's intention, but it's the way things are. Matthew chapter 19. Jesus speaking again in verses 4 through 6. He says, "Haven't you read?" He replied, "that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, 'For this reason the man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and two will become one flesh.' So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate." Now, men have either made this an important truth or they've ignored it, one or the other. They seem to go to extremes. And they look at it from a legal perspective when this is a spiritual truth, not a legal truth. The spiritual truth is the union, the oneness that results from this bond. But there's an even higher spiritual truth which Paul explains in his letters. A great mystery. Not a mystery that continues to be a mystery today, because the truth of it is revealed in the scriptures. And that mystery is that marriage was intended to communicate to us the nature of the relationship between Christ and the church, where they become one, where they are unified, where the design of God is satisfied and fulfilled. All of this, everything that we read here about the activity of creating man, is designed and originated in the mind of the creator of the cosmos. The one who created the cells that make up your body and the systems that give you life, or the cells that attack your life and try to destroy you. The animals that are in the world and all of their differences, yet their perfect design and the way they survive in the environment and replicate, multiplying their numbers, All of these things show the genius of the Creator, and that same Creator invested his genius in the creation of man. A design that is far above our understanding, both in its physical and in its spiritual complexity, but a design we are part of. Now, let's move on to another phase of the revelation here in Genesis. In chapter 12, we see God communicating to man his creation through this fellow by the name of Abram, who lives in a land of idol worshippers called Ur. Verses 1 through 3 of chapter 12 of Genesis. The Lord said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to a land that I will show you." I want to point out something here. God is not standing in front of Abraham telling him this. In fact, there's no anthropomorphic manifestation. God is communicating to Abram in his heart. And he demands an element of trust from Abram, the unseen God. Not many gods, as his fellow countrymen believed existed, but the one true, unseen God spoke to him and said, "Leave it all and go to a place that I will show you." Verse 2, "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you." Well, you see, with the fall of the man Adam, which we didn't read, but we could have, we would discover that Adam lost his relationship with God and was ejected from the garden along with Eve. Following that, there was a long period of time where the earth was populated with men who were rebellious and sinful, following after the pattern of behavior of Adam, who rejected the order of things that God had given to him. Noah was discovered to be a righteous man, and God chose Noah. He selected him to be the one to perpetuate the species after he judged the earth with a terrible flood. And it became apparent that man was in need of redemption. There needs to be a means of restoring man to the relationship that he lost with God, making it possible to once again commune with God. There was a need for a solution to the sin problem, because all of mankind followed in the pattern that Adam had established. In Romans 3:23, Paul makes this declaration, which describes it in a brief statement. He says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God," relying on what he learned of Isaiah. The beginning of this plan is revealed in Scripture when God speaks to Abram. And he tells him that all the nations of the earth will be blessed through you. Dwelling in a land of idolaters, God, speaking to Abraham, reveals to him through this initiating relationship that God was planning to bless and redeem the world through him. Now later on, God is going to give Abraham a covenant promise of inheriting a land forever, this place that he will show him, and he will live in that land forever. Now, in saying that, God committed himself to resurrection because Abraham would die. Yet God owed him that land because he made that covenant. He didn't exact from Abram any cost. He didn't say, if you do this, I'll do that, when he promised him the land. He just said to Abram, who had already obeyed him, and left Ur of Chaldees and went to the place that God would show him. God said to him, stand up, Abram, look to your left, look to the west, look to the east, look to the north, look to the south. All that you see, I will give to you and to your seed. He told him to count the sand on the seashore. Count the stars in the sky. So shall your population of heirs be. All of that was a promise that is irrevocable, that God can't take back. A promise of a resurrection. A covenant springing from and initiated by God's sovereign grace. All part of his design, a design to redeem all of mankind as a result of the fulfillment of this covenant. Paul explains the purpose of God, his intentions, in Galatians chapter 3, verse 16. In Galatians 3 and 16, he says, the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. The scripture does not say, and to seeds, meaning many people, but to your seed, meaning one person, who is Christ. So how shall the seeds be blessed? Through the one, Christ. Paul's ministry was an extension of this part of the covenant, as he was the missionary to the Jews and to the Gentiles. And the gospel that he taught and that the other apostles taught, that they learned at the feet of Jesus, and what they wrote of what he said, is the source of communication of salvation, the plan of redemption for all mankind. I'm in overtime. I didn't get to talk about Isaac or Jacob or Joseph, but I'm hoping that you did study your adult Sunday school lesson. We'll move on next week as we progress through this survey of the Old Testament. God bless you all. Are there any questions before I cut it loose? Okay. Enjoy the worship this morning.